Hello everyone, I'm Stu Hartenstein with the Central Region Umpire Advisory Committee, and we are excited to bring you another breakdown video of Little League's new 4-umpire system for the 60-foot diamond that was released back in the spring of 2021. In this video, we're going to take a specific deep dive into the job, responsibilities, and everything that U1 has to do in this 4-umpire system. Specifically, we'll look at 5 major tasks that U1 has within the 4-umpire system. Number 1, we'll review the pre-pitch positioning of U1. We call that his or her initial starting position. We'll talk a little bit about U1 receiving ground balls on the infield, U1's reaction to routine fly balls to the outfield. We'll take a look at back picks, both from the catcher and then ultimately from cutoffs or the play after the play at first base. And then lastly, we'll take a look at U1's job in rotation, the full rotation. So we'll take a deep dive here in the jobs, the responsibilities, and the mechanics necessary to be successful as U1 in this 4-umpire system. Now, we've got a couple concepts to go ahead and look at first, and then obviously we'll take a look at some video, but that is ultimately what the scope of this video will go ahead and take a look at doing. Let me go ahead and get everything lined up here for us. A lot of video, like I said, a quick slide for us to go ahead and take a look at some of the general concepts of the 4-umpire system and what exactly is expected of U1. Now, let's first start with just a general guidelines here. And again, this is a review of the initial starting position of U1. As you see, it's the traditional A position, and we want you to be square to the plate. Now, some evaluators or some UICs will either want you to use the hands-on knees set position. Some individuals will allow you to use the wide receiver kind of set position where you're kind of not necessarily straddling the line, but you're leaning forward on one foot. Whatever your evaluator is looking to do is acceptable, but nonetheless, we should be square to the plate, and we should be completely in foul territory and not touching the line. So completely in foul territory and not touching the line. Now, our distance is going to vary, and our distance is going to vary based upon the positioning of the first baseman. So if the first baseman is playing at normal depth, as you see here, we're going to be 10 to 12 feet behind that fielder. Now, 10 to 12 feet is only about 3 to 4 steps. So keep that in mind as you start to see your positioning, because what we're going to encourage umpires to do is shorten up a little bit, and that way we can get to where we need to be, both in rotation and in reaction to plays. So again, think about 3 to 4 steps more so than 10 to 12 feet. And again, that is a general guideline off the first baseman as he or she is playing at normal depth. Now, if the first baseman decides to creep up in front of the base, so too are we. We're never going to be any more than that 10 to 12 feet, or any less, I should say, any less than that 10 to 12 feet from first base in that situation. So again, if the first baseman moves up, so too can U1, but never closer than 10 to 12 feet. And again, that's 3 to 4 steps, which is closer than you think. And again, shortening up and being closer for your initial starting position is a good rule of thumb, because it's going to allow us to be where we need to be on time and in position, as well as affording freedom of movement for all our fielders. Likewise, if the fielder moves backwards, just as we talked about moving forwards, remember, we're going to move up and react to that position of the fielder. If the fielder moves up, if he or she moves back, does the first baseman, so too are we. But we don't necessarily need to keep that 10 to 12 foot distance if F3 is going to go ahead and play further back towards, let's say, the grass line. So if F3 is playing deeper, we're not going to continue to increase our distance. So we're going to reduce our distance, but still we must afford freedom of movement. So that means that we're not going to be parallel or right next to that fielder, but rather we're going to be at least a step or two behind when the first baseman decides to play at a deeper starting position. So just a couple things here to keep in mind. Normal starting position, 10 to 12 feet, which is about 3 to 4 steps. If the fielder moves up, so too will we, but never 10 to 12 feet, never closer than 10 to 12 feet from first base. And then obviously behind U1, if we start to see the F3 or the first baseman move further back or deeper, we are going to get a little bit behind the first baseman there, not 10 to 12 feet. We're going to reduce that distance back to about a step or two. Now remember, the U1 is going to be responsible for fair foul from the front edge of the base and beyond. So that is one piece of responsibility there too. And then remember, the area of responsibility for which then U1 is responsible for catch, no catch, is basically from the right fielder, anything that takes the right fielder to the line. So a couple things there to think about pre-pitch. Number 1, your depth. Secondly, fair foul coverage from the front edge of the base and beyond. And then lastly, your area of responsibility is U1, which is anything that takes the right fielder then towards the right field line. Now let's take a look at some of the movements that are necessary then for U1 here. First off, we're going to go ahead and start with infield ground balls and what exactly we are going to see U1 be expected to do. Now this is not going to be too dissimilar to what we've seen and been taught in the two-umpire system. So with these angle distance plays, with these routine ground balls, if you will, in the infield, our goal is to find our 90-degree angle, and that is exactly what we see here. That's angle distance. So you can see the different colors that kind of show us where the different directions from each the fielder's throw will be, and obviously we want to be positioned 90 degrees from that throw. Now on the 60-foot diamond, it is important enough for us to go ahead and see that we want to try and stay in fair territory as much as possible. Realistically, the only time we should be taking a play, an angle distance play, a force play at first base, the only time we should be taking a force play at first base in foul territory should basically be that 9-3 put out. Anything that requires us to basically take a play over our shoulder and require rapid eye movement, that basically then means that we should take that in foul territory. But for the most part, because we don't necessarily feel that pressure from F4, and then obviously everything over to the left side of the second baseman can definitely be attained in that 90-degree angle, we want to take as many plays as we can in fair territory, with the exception of that 9-3 put out, or potentially anything from shallow right field that would require a rapid eye movement for us to go ahead and pick up the play at first base. Now remember, we want to get our eyes ahead of the throw as early as we can. Obviously, we want to see from the direction it's coming. That way we know that information, can find our 90. But if you've ever heard anyone talk about plays at first base, force plays blowing up on them, that means that they did not get their eyes ahead of the throw soon enough. So yes, we can talk about angle distance in the 90 degrees, and that's our positioning to be able to see the ball into the glove. But at the same time, we must get our eyes ahead of the throw and to first base. And as we go ahead and fixate our eyes ahead of the throw, that is what prevents the play from blowing up on us. So make sure we get our eyes ahead of the throw as soon as we possibly can. Now, a couple of different video examples here of some of this fundamentals. Here's a ground ball to the shortstop, over to first base, and as you see, our first base umpire has found that 90-degree angle here with the throw. And again, he has taken his eyes ahead of the throw and got them to first base before the throw is essentially on its way over it. Again, that's what prevents this play from blowing up on anyone. Here's another example. So this is a ground ball to the second baseman. He or she fields it, and again, the umpire's 90-degree angle is a little bit closer to that foul line. But again, remember, we want to take as many plays as we can in fair territory. We get that 90-degree angle. Again, you saw the umpire get his eyes ahead of the throw. Rewind it a little bit here for us. Again, we see where exactly the ball is fielded to make sure it's fielded. Then get your eyes ahead of the throw. That way the play doesn't blow up on you here on this force play at first base. But again, we want to make sure that we get our 90-degree angle. Now, obviously, we want to use our eyes properly. And as I mentioned here, that number one makes us to have to realize where the ball is being fielded. So here, in this example, we see the ball being fielded by the third baseman. And that proper use of eyes allows us to know the vicinity of where our 90-degree angle will be for this angle distance play developing at first base. Now, as this ball is fielded and right as the fielder is getting ready to throw it on over, we want to get our eyes to the bag. Okay, we want to get our eyes to the bag. Number one, so the play doesn't blow up on us. But secondly, doing so allows us to go ahead and read untrue throw. So we want to read the first baseman, the person who is receiving the throw. And if this first baseman, if he or she has to come off the base, then that's going to trigger a reaction to us. And as we see here, to go ahead and react to this untrue throw, our eyes have to go ahead of the throw first, as we mentioned. And then secondly, they have to go ahead and focus on the bag. And in the use of eyes, we're going to see the first baseman react to an untrue throw, and then we are going to go ahead and step towards the line, as this umpire does, to go ahead and get a view on this tag attempt. So again, reading and reacting to an untrue throw is all dependent upon proper use of eyes. Number one, seeing where the throw is coming from so we can get our 90-degree angle appropriately, and then fixating our eyes ahead of the throw to, number one, get them on the bag, and then secondly, make sure that we read the fielder's reaction to untrue throw. And if he's going to go ahead and react to an untrue throw, we can adjust towards the line as this umpire does. Proper use of eyes to confirm firm and secure possession here yet again, and then make the out call. So a couple basic fundamentals here that we've seen and used in two umpire systems and things like that definitely translate on over to handling ground balls in the infield as U1 in the four umpire system. Now, the last type of play we could potentially see as you won in the infield is either a foot race play or a run and roll. And what we mean by run and roll is like the second baseman's covering the base, or let's say it's a ground ball to the first baseman and the pitcher covers. Those are a little bit more unorthodox for us on the 60-foot diamond. You'll see them more obviously on the bigger diamonds, but nonetheless, that means that we can potentially definitely see those here too. But nonetheless, here foot race plays and run and roll plays. Again, it's important for us to stay in fair territory. For whatever reason, many umpires want to try and take these plays in foul territory. We don't necessarily want to do that, and I'll explain why here. Remember that we only want to use foul territory for rapid eye movement from stuff coming to us from shallow right field or potentially that 9-3 putout. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So we have a ground ball to the first baseman, and it's going to become a foot race play between the first baseman and the batter runner to first base. Okay. Now, again, we want to make sure that we take this play in fair territory. And you can see here that our umpire is moving in fair territory. Doing so allows us to maintain a window, as we see here, to clearly determine whose foot touches the base first. Sometimes when we go into foul territory, that's going to put either the runner or potentially a fielder in between our line of vision into first base. So moving into fair territory gives us this unobstructed look to determine then very clearly which foot, either the fielders or the runners, touches first base first. Okay, and that's exactly what we see this umpire do. Again, a really good look here at this ball to the first baseman. If I go ahead and pause it right about here, we can see that is essentially the, quote, wedge. We can see here that he can very clearly see in an unobstructed way whose foot touches first. And again, this is kind of the only spot we can be guaranteed to see that. Now, sometimes we may have to fight the second baseman who may be coming over. And again, coming over into fair territory does allow us to essentially try and box that individual out. I'm not saying that we have to get physical, but nonetheless here, that is exactly what we want to see then done here is that we go ahead and get into fair territory for these. And the only time we go into foul territory then is that 9-3 put out rapid eye movement over our shoulders. Now, I've got another example here of an umpire who elects to go into foul territory here. And I don't think that this umpire in this clip actually wanted to take this play into foul territory. I think he's pushed over there by the actions of the second baseman. Nonetheless, here, let's see what exactly being in foul territory for this foot race play basically presents as to why exactly we may want to think about not going into foul territory for these foot race plays. Very similar play, ground ball to the first baseman. Here we see it's fielded, okay, and our first base umpire starts to go ahead and move in the direction of fair territory. But as he starts to see the second baseman and the first baseman kind of drops the ball, all kind of converge in that first base, he moves into foul territory thinking that that's where his angle is going to be. Think about if this umpire stays in fair territory and gets the look that our umpire in the previous clip would have had. He would have had that kind of window, that wedge look, if you will, in an unobstructed view to be able to see whose foot touched the base first. And as we see here, as this play develops, a really close one here, he's got to look through the second baseman. And then even at that, if we remove the second baseman, we've also got the runner here as well, who is essentially in between the umpire and both feet there on the base. So again, we want to try and take these as much as possible in fair territory. And really the only time we want to go into foul territory for a force out at first base is that 9-3 put out, because it requires rapid eye movement or us taking the play over our shoulder. Even in foot race plays, as we see in these last two clips, we want to try and take them in fair territory. Now, interestingly, if you take a look at this replay, let me move the timer here. If we take a look at the replay, again, think about where the umpire is in this view. We should kind of see him right about in between the runner and the fielder in fair territory. But again, this runner may have missed the base here too. And again, because the umpire is in foul territory and the runner then is basically now between the umpire, the base, and even the fielder who's attempting to make the play, it makes this, and viewing this play, really, really difficult for U1. Which is ultimately why we would suggest taking as many plays as possible in fair territory for force plays at first base, rather than moving into foul territory. So the majority of force plays at first base should be taken from fair territory. The only one that should be taken in foul territory is that 9-3 put out. Now, that's not to say we don't take plays in foul territory at first base, because we will, but we'll do that rather with our tag plays. Couple other things here with ground balls on the infield. We'll also talk about the imaginary box, and that's essentially what is depicted here for us. So we've kind of talked about some of the more challenging plays, untrue throw, for example, foot race play, as we talked about. But plays in the imaginary box are another one here for us too. Remember that our goal is to get that 90-degree angle. So if you think about balls that are in this imaginary box are generally bunt attempts, maybe like half swings or poor swings, or even uncaught third strikes. So balls coming from this, or thrown balls, excuse me, coming from this angle distance box that you see shaded in green are going to take to the umpire into the vicinity of the baseline between first and second base. Now, again, that's the target distance. Sometimes the play doesn't give us enough time to get there. So we want to get as close to that point as we possibly can. So however much time we have in the play, we want to get there in that time. But nonetheless, here we want to do those same fundamentals. Number one, see it, proper use of eyes so we know where it's coming from. Secondly, get our right angle or our 90-degree angle, which in the imaginary box is closer to the baseline between first and second. We want to get as far as the play essentially allows us to, get set with our eyes ahead of the throw, and then go ahead and take the play there at first base. An example here of a play in this angle distance, or I'm sorry, in this imaginary box. Here we've got a swing fielded by the pitcher right there in that box. And remember, that box basically goes from the 30-foot line, from the first base line to the mound and then on over. So it's fielded then in this box. And then we can see our umpire, our first base umpire, does a great job of getting in the vicinity of the baseline between first and second base, which is then the right angle or the 90-degree angle with the throw. Now he sees from where it's coming from, then he gets his eyes ahead of the throw here. So he sees this action at first base, gets as far as the play allows him to, and again, balls fielded in that imaginary box are going to take us then a little bit more to that baseline between first and second base, so we see the ball into the glove and can see all factors of the play there. Now that's U1's job for most of the balls on the infield. Okay, so we've talked about routine ground balls, we've talked about foot race plays, we've talked about untrue throws, and even in kind of choppers or plays in that imaginary box. Let's take a look then here next at what exactly U1's job is to do with routine balls to the outfield. Now, as I mentioned, we want to take as many plays at first base regarding force plays. So everything that we've talked about beforehand here, we want to take those in fair territory. However, tag plays at first base, tag plays, we're actually going to take those in foul territory. So force plays are in fair territory as much as possible. And then tag plays for U1 in the four-umpire system, they happen to be mostly taken in foul territory here. So let's take a look at some of these routine balls to the outfield. Here we have a routine ball to right field. Okay, so it's a base hit. And we want to take a look at what exactly U1's steps look like here with this base hit. Now, obviously, he does not need, or she does not need, to go ahead and come into fair territory because we're not going to have a 9-3 put out here. But rather, we've got a position for the potential play after the play. So, for example, let's say if this ball gets cut off and we have a play back into first base, we want to see U1 position there. Now, if we take a look at U1, we can see his shadow. And essentially where U1 has position is at what we call point of first base, or point of first base. That's basically right behind the base. And we're going to use kind of Will Little's track system. So we're going to go right behind then the fielder receiving the throw. In that case, just in case this pitcher who cut the ball off fires the ball back to first base and we have a play there, we've essentially then positioned ourselves effectively on that track to wedge up, or go ahead and have the wedge look for that tag play at first base. I believe we'll see then exactly that fundamental expressed here. So again, a base hit up the middle. We want to see that umpire move to point of base. Okay, so we want to make sure that we see the umpire move to point of base so that we can use the wedge. And just as I mentioned here, we get a cutoff. You can see the batter runners kind of hung out to dry right here. And then all of a sudden, this ball is cut off and now thrown back to first base. If you take a look at our umpire right here, he is at point of base, and he's going to be able then to work the same track as the first baseman to find the wedge, keep his head and eyes in between the base side hip of the fielder receiving the throw and then the runner coming in. Okay, so that positioning there allows him then, moving towards point of base on routine balls, is exactly the job that we want to see U1 do with the ball in the outfield. Now, back picks at first base are another very challenging situation for U1 to go ahead and have here in the four-umpire system. And before we get into any of these clips, it's important to note our starting position. So with first base occupied, here, a lot of times the first baseman either plays even with first base or in front of first base. So remember, our initial starting position is if the fielder moves up, so too can we, but never 10 to 12 feet from first base. That's 3 to 4 steps. So as you're working with R1 only, with first base occupied or R1 only there, so anytime first base is occupied, you still want to play off the first baseman. And remember, if the first baseman moves up, so too will we, because again, it's really important that we get positioned for the back pick back into first base. So our positioning for these back picks at first base are going to be dependent, number one, largely on our initial starting position. As I just mentioned, we want to see you shorten up. Secondly, we're going to want to see you take those post-pitch steps. So as the pitch comes in, we kind of want to at least be able to move or be ready to move once the catcher receives the ball to put us in position for a back play at first base. And then lastly, our instincts, our ability to anticipate. So those three are going to be really important for successful positioning for back picks at first base. Again, initial starting position, which is shortening up relative to the first baseman. Secondly, being able then to take aggressive post-pitch steps. And then lastly, our ability to anticipate a developing play. Let's take a look at some examples here. If everybody would take a look here at U1, you can see he is kind of shortened up. Remember, 3 to 4 steps off the first baseman is what we want to see here, so that we don't necessarily have as much ground to cover, either in rotation if necessary. Here, U1's obviously not going to rotate because we have runners in scoring position. But nonetheless here, it's either to go ahead and rotate in the full rotation if we just had an R1 only situation, or to get in position and for the back pick. So shortening up just makes us quicker to be able to find the best position possible. Remember, to be successful at back picks, I've got them on the bottom edge of the screen here. To be successful at back picks, number one, your pre-pitch initial starting position should shorten up as we see this umpire do. Secondly, we've got to take some intense and efficient post-pitch steps. And third, we've got to be aware and at least have some ability to anticipate here. Now here, let's see this back pick. And by back pick, what I mean is we're going to see a pitch come in, and then the catcher is actually going to try and attempt a pickoff play at first base. So here we have this pitch come in. Boom, here's our pickoff play. And again, we've shortened up, and you can see as this pitch came in, let's take a look at our U1 here. Don't look at the pitch, look at U1. So the pitch is coming in. U1 is taking some post-pitch steps, which is going to provide him then with an optimal viewing angle for this potential tag play. Here's another good look at it. Remember, again, shorten up your initial starting position so that you are quicker to go ahead and get back to where you need to be. And again, this umpire's goal is to get his head and eyes in between the runner diving back into the base and the fielder covering the base. Okay? And again, that's all determined on our ability then to get to that spot by, number one, shortening up our pre-pitch starting position, and then secondly, taking those post-pitch steps. Here's a great look. Everybody take a look at U1. He's moving again. He's shortened up. And then obviously, he's kind of probably tracked this developing over the course of time, been able to anticipate. And as we start to see the cross diamond viewing angle right here, this umpire is almost exactly where he needs to be. And again, the timing is very quick here too, so we can only get as far as the play allows us to. This umpire, we should kind of see his head and eyes, probably about another step down or so. But nonetheless, I think this umpire's done a really good job of, number one, starting closer or shortening up in his initial starting position. Secondly, taking those post-pitch steps. And then third, having the awareness to get down the line as far as the play allows him to get the best look possible, try and get his head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder. Another example here, these back picks back into the base, and again, they happen really quickly, which is why we've got to shorten up, anticipate, and take those post-pitch steps. We see this one back in. U1 is exactly where we need him to be. Maybe a step too close. We talk about toes like on the grass line, so to speak, as opposed to toes on the foul line, which we see here. But nonetheless, we want to see this umpire's head and eyes in between the runner and the fielder here on this back pick. That's exactly what we saw from the umpire in the previous clip, and it's exactly what we see here again from the umpire in this clip. Again, remember, our ability to get to this spot is dependent upon, number one, shortening up our pre-pitch starting position, never closer than 10 to 12 feet from first base. So we want to shorten up with the first baseman. Secondly, taking post-pitch steps. And then third, our ability to anticipate and react then to things as they develop. The last segment here of responsibilities for U1 in the four-umpire system for us to chat about then happens to be a U1 in full rotation. Now, the full rotation is the only time that U1 is actually responsible for moving away from first base. And in the full rotation, which is used anytime U2 or U3 leaves with no runners in scoring position, that's what NRISP stands for. So when U2 and U3 leaves and with no runners in scoring position, we use the full rotation, which means everybody moves. We have coverage at second base. The plate umpire leaves the plate and moves up to third. And then U1 is responsible for, number one, handling business at first base, as we see here. So he's responsible for R1 and the batter runner at first base, and then releasing to point of plate through foul territory. So that's the general guidelines, the general things then that U1 is responsible for here in rotation. Now remember, U1's goal in rotation is to rotate aggressively with the intention of arriving before the runner. So again, we have to kind of know the situation, the runners that are at play, so on and so forth. Our goal is to be at the plate, at point of plate, ready to go ahead and wedge up that potential tag play, that potential scoring play at the plate before the runner arrives. So again, U1 in the full rotation, it is used anytime U2 or U3 leaves with no runners in scoring position. U1 is still responsible for everything at first base, but once those responsibilities are done, U1 is going to rotate aggressively with the intention of arriving at point of plate to use the wedge before the play develops. And again, that's all going to be determined by how we then see the play. Now remember, as we see U1 here, and we'll see him in these clips, is going to move down to point of plate in foul territory. All right, so let's take a look at the job here of U1 in full rotation. Here we actually have a developing play at the plate. So let's take a look here at the job of U1. Fly ball out to the left center that threatens the boundary. U2 is out. U3, as you see him, just flashed on the bottom of the screen to cover second base. Our plate umpire, as we see here in the full rotation, has moved up to third base. And that means then in this full rotation, U1 is going to observe everything that he needs to at first base on the batter runner and R1 if necessary. But then we want to see U1 rotate aggressively in foul territory and get to point of plate to wedge up the play here at the plate. Okay? And as we see this play develop here at the plate, U1 has moved down to point of plate, and he has then effectively used those three steps of the wedge. Starting at point of plate, 5 to 7 feet from the fielder receiving the throw, adjusting with the fielder who's moved up the line, so he's moved up the line as well. And then third, he's stayed in the window to go ahead and keep his head and eyes in between the plate side hip of the catcher receiving the throw and then the runner here as well. The bonus here, proper use of eyes. You see that his eyes go straight to the glove for the release, confirms firm and secure possession and voluntary release, and then makes his signal. Okay, very good job here by our plate umpire. Again, I'll go ahead and rewind it so that we see the entire possession and the entire play here as U1 comes down in foul territory here in the full rotation. Again, fly ball here for U1 out, or fly ball for the crew out into left center. U2 is out. U3, as we see here, covers second base. Plate umpire moves up to third, as we see there. And then our plate umpire moves down the line in foul territory to point of plate, rotates aggressively so that he can then wedge this one up accordingly here. He does a good job of applying all those fundamentals of wedge positioning there for this play at the plate. Now, the other play that we may also have is a home run. I just want to make sure that I cover the home run mechanic here for everyone as well, because U1 is going to be responsible here in this full rotation. He's going to be responsible for the touches at home plate on R1 in this case, as we see here, and then also the batter runner. So again, we want to have those same fundamentals. Remember, he's got to hold on to that position, does U1, or she has to hold on to U1, to first base, to observe everything that they are supposed to. U1 is supposed to with the touch of the batter runner and obviously anything that could potentially happen on R1 as well. So this is a home run. We see it clear the fence right there. The crew is going to rotate. That's U3, who's now at second base, to observe touches there. Plate umpire moves up to third base. And then our first base umpire will still rotate down the line in foul territory. And then on the home run mechanic, we just want to get wherever we can to go ahead and observe the touches at the plate here in the full rotation. Now, that may mean that we're in front of the plate. That may mean that we're behind the plate or whatever it might be. But we just have to have eyes on that touch of the plate. Now, we don't necessarily need to try and hold anybody back. You know, this isn't college baseball. This isn't Major League Baseball. Obviously, these kids are making memories and things like that. So we don't necessarily need to hold anybody back from the dirt circle. We don't need to get physical and touch anyone or anything like that. All we need to do is rotate aggressively, be there before the runners are going to touch the plate, and then find a spot wherever the heck that might be without pushing or shoving, wherever it might be, to observe the touch and then head on back to first base. So that ultimately is our home run mechanic here, and we'll see a replay of it. Again, ball's out. You can see our home plate umpire moves down the line in foul territory. First base umpire we saw do a really good job here, observes the batter's runner's touch right there, rotates aggressively down the line in foul territory, and he's going to be there for the touch at home plate. And that's going to wrap up the responsibilities of U1 here in the 4-umpire system for us in Little League on the 60-foot diamond. Remember the 5 kind of categories that we talked mostly about. Number 1, our initial starting position. And remember, that's all variance based upon the positioning of the first baseman. If the first baseman moves up, so too will we. If the first baseman moves back, we're not going to have that 10 to 12-foot distance that we would otherwise have with the first baseman playing in normal position, but rather we're going to shorten that up and only be about a step or two behind him to afford freedom of movement. Talked about a variety of things here with infield ground balls, both routine, things that pull the first baseman off the line, things in the angle distance box, and foot race plays. Talked about routine plays to the outfield, moving towards point of base to go ahead and get throws back in on any action on the batter runner or whatever it might be at first base. Talking about back picks and starting that position and anticipating and taking those post-pitch steps. And then lastly, the fundamentals of rotating in the full rotation. And that'll go ahead and complete our conversation and a deep, detailed dive into the responsibilities of U1 here. We'll take a look then at U2 and U3 in some future videos, so be sure to go ahead and check those out here when they become available. Thanks for your attention, and be on the lookout here for more videos breaking down Little League's new 4-umpire system released in the spring of 2021 here for the 60-foot diamond.